Well, good morning there, everyone. It's kind of like all right. Most of y'all been in the black church, so you know how we do that. Well, thank you all for joining us for our April 2018 Inside America National Urban League Breakfast Series. We've been very, very fortunate. We've been at this breakfast series for 3 years now, and we're very pleased and excited to have the National Urban League as our partner with us this year. So Don and to Mr. Moriel, we appreciate your support on that. Inside America, as many of you know, was founded back in 2010. We have 16 members of Congress that serve as our honorary co-chairs. We were founded on a basic principle, and I don't like to go through everything that's in the webpage, but think of a pendulum. It swings in and out. So that pendulum swings out, and what we want to have happen is for members of Congress, speakers of the House, cabinet secretaries to engage and talk to communities of color. So that pendulum is swinging out. We also want it to swing back in. We would like for communities of color and representatives and organizations, corporate sector and the faith-based sector as well, engage members of Congress. So that's our mission statement through kind of a pictorial overview of that. But again, thank you for joining us this morning. We've been very, very fortunate. We've tried since 2010 to commit our work to the Lord, as they say in Proverbs, and then your plans will succeed. So we've been very fortunate. We have continued to commit our work to the Lord, and our plans have been very successful. We've had over 7 cabinet secretaries over the last 2 years, and we've had a myriad of chairmen, committee chairs, and member leadership. I remember 3 years ago when we first launched this breakfast series, my colleague said, well, hey, we're not going to be able to get anyone to come. Well, we found over the last 2 years we have more requests than months. So we typically have about 18 requests, and there's only 12 months in a year, so we're doing very well. But again, thank you all for coming. I'm going to let my colleague, Don, say a few words. After you do that, we'll do that.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. It's good to see all of you. As Elroy said, I'm Don Cravens, Jr., Executive Director of the Washington Bureau for the National Urban League. Speaker Ryan, good to see you. Welcome. We've enjoyed this partnership with Insight. This is our second breakfast, as Elroy mentioned, where we've been able to be part of this bipartisan breakfast series. The National Urban League, Mr. Speaker, has always been always known that in order to reach economic empowerment for African Americans and people of color, it's going to take a bipartisan solution to do that. And so we are always very honored to be part of bipartisan coalitions, and so we're very happy to be here and glad that you could join us today. The National Urban League was founded in 1910, Mr. Speaker, when African Americans were leaving the Deep South and moving to places like New York and Boston and Washington, looking for a job, a school, a home, and a hospital. And we have continued to be that organization that is helping African Americans, but all Americans, to seek the American dream, to have a good, solid foundation for themselves and for their families. And we continue to do that in 36 states, including the District of Columbia. And we've got 90 affiliates located all across this great land. And so we're proud of the work that we do. I will mention 3 things, Mr. Speaker, that we have worked on really since we were founded, but that we've really been working on in the last couple of years. And we're hoping that for your remaining tenure, you will consider these things. First of all, I do want to say that we were encouraged with the passage of a budget, a bipartisan budget. And although not everything we wanted to see in the budget was there, we understand how the legislative process works. We were encouraged to see that there was funding for many of the programs that the Urban League participates in, such as our adult and youth training programs. We run many programs where we train our young people, train our adults, retrain adults for jobs. Our apprenticeship programs, we have very powerful and robust apprenticeship programs. We have a very successful reentry program from young men and young women who are leaving prison and coming back and trying to get back into the workforce. And I know that's a priority of yours as well. I know ending poverty has been a priority of yours. You've stated on several occasions that you want that to be something, part of your legacy. And so I say all that to say we're hoping with the passage of this budget and the remaining time you've got in Congress, we can work with you on some of those priorities. Infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, it has been a word that has been used here on Capitol Hill. The Urban League believes it knows a little something about infrastructure needs in urban America. For the last 60 years or so, we've been promoting a plan called the Main Street Marshall Plan, where we would invest in infrastructure in our communities. And so we hope that in your remaining time that infrastructure is focused on. Infrastructure in things, physical things, but also infrastructure on individuals as well. And we want to be part of that discussion. And then last but not least, Mr. Speaker, the Urban League since 2013 has been begging, pleading to have hearings on the restoration of the Voting Rights Act. As you know, in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down several provisions of the Voting Rights Act. And so we would ask, Mr. Speaker, again, in your remaining time, that you ask Chairman Goodlatte and members of the committee to consider having hearings. This has always been a bipartisan issue. Yes, sir. And so it's always been a bipartisan issue, and we would like to see those protections of the Voting Rights Act restored. And so that's where we are at the National Urban League. Again, we welcome you and look forward to hearing from you this morning. And if we can be of help and assistance to you, please count on the Urban League.
Thank you very much, Don. So what we're going to do is there's only one politician in the room, and I don't think we have a pastor in the room. So I want you all to be organizational chairs and heads and just give me your name and your organization name. Because if you're not a politician or a pastor, you should be able to just do that, correct? So we're going to start with Mr. Lewis Green. Right, we're going to say the talking for the politician and our leader. And then just give your name and organization, and then we'll get the program started.
Yeah, good morning. Lewis Green, National Minority Supplier Development Council.
Good morning. Angela Saylor, the Heritage Foundation.
Good morning, Speaker Michael Steele, Inside America.
That's my better half.
Good morning, Lisa Fager with the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation.
Good morning, Ron Langston, former National Director of MBDA under the Bush administration and now Principal at Langston Global Enterprises.
Good morning, Christopher Metzler, Inside America.
Tony Williams, Comcast NBC Universal.
Carl Currington, National Minority Technology Council.
Malcolm Glenn, Uber.
Erin Hastings, National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials.
April Ryan, American Urban Radio Networks.
DJ Jordan with Senator James Lankford's office.
Tui Lo, Asian American Women Business Coalition.
Tommy Schultz, American Federation for Children.
Luana Russell, Business Management Associates.
Jesse Price, Eli Lilly and Company.
Chris Baggett, Bristol Myers Squibb.
John Schilling, American Federation for Children.
Bob Woodson, the Woodson Center.
And Kay James, Heritage Foundation.
Well, thank you all. We've got a very distinguished audience here, so we appreciate, again, your coming. I'm going to, let's start with a prayer, and then we're going to introduce the speaker. Well, let's have our, we don't have any pastors, but we do have someone who went to divinity school. So, Mr. Steele, I think that qualifies you.
I went to church on Sunday.
So, why don't you lead us in prayer, Mr. Steele?
All right, here we go. Lord, we give you thanks for this day that you have made for us. We are glad in it. We thank you for the blessings of this great nation. We thank you for the opportunity to come together under her banner to share in ideas and thoughts, prayerful remindfulness of what our missions are, is, and should be. We give thanks for this speaker and his leadership, for the time and commitment he's made to our country, for the betterment of his people, and the fruits of their labor. We give thanks to our president. We give thanks for all the good men and women in this room who toil in your vineyard on behalf of service to others. And we ask for your continued blessing on these and all those who serve in your name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Mr. Dockery and Jonathan, you all did send me the speaker's bio, but I'm not compelled to read a bio to introduce the speaker. I'm going to
read their bios.
read their bios. I'm going to just really speak from the heart. But, you know, I've got a chance to watch the speaker up close and personal over the last few years. I've come to see a man of great principle. I've come to see a man that keeps his word. I've come to know the speaker as someone that is not afraid to push the envelope and work on issues that sometimes may not be as traditional as we would tend to see on the Republican side of the aisle. So we truly appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. I always like to say that in Washington, you can hire really, really smart people like Jonathan and Derek to give you great policy. You can hire really, really smart press people like April Ryan to help you say the right thing and do all the communication things, Mr. Speaker. You can hire a really, really nice tailor and dress like Mr. Woodson and Michael Steele and look really, really nice. But friends, one thing you can't hire, one thing you can't buy. You can't hire, you can't buy goodness. You can't hire and you can't buy decency. And you can't hire and you can't buy someone that loves and follows the Lord. Those are things you can't hire and you can't buy. They're put in your DNA from our Creator. Mr. Speaker, that's how I want to just introduce you as a guy that you can't hire and buy those things, but a man who has great integrity, a man who follows the Lord, and a man who just has goodness in his heart. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here with us this morning. We're going to give you politicians' time, and I think the staff said 7 to...
I'm not a senator, so it won't be for...
Mr. Congressman. You call me Mr. Senator. I just promoted you since your retirement.
Yeah. It's not a promotion.
That's true. Mr. Congressman, well, let's go ahead, Mr. Speaker, and we'll give you as much time as you need to talk, and then we'll go into Q&A. And when we get into the Q&A, I do have my glasses on, so some of the folks back in the back, when you get ready to answer your question, just take your little template, do it like this, and then we'll put you in the queue, and we'll do Q&A. And where's the staff? What time does the congressman have to leave, the speaker? Quarter after. So right after, we're going to do a quick photo op. We're going to keep the speaker seated, and we're going to ask everyone to come up and just fill in behind us, and then we'll do a quick photo op so we can get this historic picture on the eve of your pending retirement.
All right.
All right, Mr. Speaker.
All right, well, I got to say, Elroy, that's way better than any introduction JC would have done. So, so thanks, man. I really appreciate that. No, and please, Don, thank you very much. Look, I'll be pretty brief because I don't want to take up all the time talking. Let me do what we've done and what we want to continue doing, what we plan for this session. Look, some of you are real close friends. I mean, look, that's my mentor right there. I mean, Bob and I have we've known each other for 25 years, spent a lot of time around America. Kay is one of my inspirational leaders. Since he and I were working with Jack Kemp back in the early 90s on enterprise zone legislation, this was something that we've been talking about and fighting for decades. That is now the law of the land. I don't know if you know this, most people don't, but we put in the tax bill, we call them empowerment zones now. It's exactly what when I was a Kemp staffer was working on. So now a state can designate 25% of its poor census tracts for enterprise zone treatment, which means any person can sell an asset, not pay capital gains on that asset, and put that asset in these poor census tracts to create economic growth and development. They keep that money in that census tract for at least 10 years. They don't pay capital gains taxes on that. So this is an enormous, this is what we've been working on. I've been working on this since I was 22 years old. This is an enormous tax incentive for revitalizing our poor communities. We also have in law social impact bonds. That's a newer idea that we came up with. Todd Young and I worked on this over at Ways and Means Committee. This was really his big baby. Social impact bonds is a great private sector way of getting private capital to back up private sector innovative ideas for fighting poverty, and the bond pays off if the outcome is achieved. So this is a real innovative way to bring solutions to communities for problems of poverty, social ills, that put money up front to it, and if those metrics are met, the bond pays off. We're on the cusp of passing a bill Patty Murray and I have on measuring outcomes of poverty programs. The problem we've had is, as far as I've seen it, and there's lots of problems, but we've been measuring success on fighting poverty based on effort and input, not on outcome and results. How much money are we spending, how many people are on programs, not whether we're actually getting at the root cause of poverty, not at whether we're actually getting people out of poverty. So we want to have an outcome-based, results-oriented approach, but in order to do that, you've got to actually measure whether it's occurring or not. So Patty and I passed a commission bill, the commission of academics and experts, total nonpartisan commission, privacy experts, told us how you measure this stuff. Now we want to go execute that. So that is close to getting into law. So those are three things that we've done that or are being done this year. to advance our goals on upward mobility. And what's coming up, we really want to focus on workforce development. Workforce development is education reform, specifically it's career technical education, vocational technical education reform, because we now are in an economy where we have pretty tight labor markets. We got to, you know, we have our unemployment rates are at a 4 handle. It's 2.9% in Wisconsin. So we've got jobs being offered, but we got a gap between people who are in poverty, people who don't have skills, who could go get a really nice career. So we want to fill that gap by pulling people out of poverty, off of welfare, into education, training, into good careers and jobs. So that's going to be our spring focus. That means career technical education reform. That means higher education reform. It means food stamp reform to have guaranteed, you know, apprenticeships for able-bodied people who are going to be working. It's something we got from the Heritage Foundation is basically the crafter of this idea. So that's going to be part of our spring agenda. Prison reform is something we're also, that's one thing I mean, I'm for criminal justice reform as well, but prison reform is something that I know we have a pretty good consensus on. So I'm pretty confident we can get out of the Judiciary Committee a good raft of federal prison reform bills, and I think we can get those moving. So then you mentioned infrastructure. We're going to start with FAA, which is air traffic control. That we're going to pass out of here probably in 3 or 4 weeks. Then we're going to go on to water. Think Flint, think harbors, think ports. That's water resources. So we're going to do that legislation. Then we're going to move on streamlining the permits. The problem we have with infrastructure projects, big ones, especially like urban ones, is they all touch the federal government usually, and they take 4 to 10 years to get approved. And that is just slowing the system down tremendously. So we want to dramatically overhaul and streamline that process. So those projects get approved and they're being built next year. You know, and that's what we want to do is streamline it. One agency, one approval process, one environmental impact statement so we can get these projects done quickly. The budget you mentioned pre-capitalizes a lot of that infrastructure, but it won't work if it takes you 10 years to get, you know, the approval process to start moving shovels. So that is part of our spring agenda. There's many other things, but we think we've moved the ball quite a bit, and we think we have more to do this spring and summer on this front. The last thing I'll say is I'm a big believer in case management. I'm a big believer in local poverty-fighting groups who are on the streets, who are meeting people eye to eye, who know how to fix problems in communities. I learned this from Bob. And that is what we want to continue pushing and emphasizing. Some people, you know, academics call it case management. I call it subsidiarity. As a Catholic, we call it basically doing what works. And you know what I mean? And we want to do what works. And we believe with our agricultural reforms and with the other reforms we're talking about, we're going to advance that cause and advance that ball. And so our goal at the end of this is in an economy where you got boomers retiring, fewer people following the workforce, it's a golden opportunity. With economic growth growing much higher, with wages going up, careers being offered, we've got this skills gap and an opportunities gap that is in desperate need of closing, and we have an opportunity to close that gap. So I really am actually excited and bullish about our ability to do this. And that's one of the reasons why I'm happy with the announcement I made yesterday, because I feel like we've made a big impact in a short period of time, and now we've got to just go execute. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We appreciate that. We're going to start with our first question, and I would be remiss if I did not give my mentor, and I call her Mama Kay, the first question. And I see you, Dr. Langston, but I got to go first to Mrs. James. I apologize. So, Mrs. James, we're going to start with you.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your service, your principled leadership in this country. And, you know, it's sort of code when people say, I am resigning to spend more time with my family.
It's actually true in my particular case.
And that's the point I want to make. It is true. It came through loud and clear. And for those of us who have been active in the pro-family movement for all these years, what an absolute model that you are. So it's not just policy for you, you're actually living it out. And we are grateful for you doing that. And it was eminently believable yesterday, and it came through loud and clear. The agenda that you just laid out is one that, first of all, I don't think most Americans are aware of.
I know.
The things that have already been accomplished, I don't think even most of us around this table are aware of. And it's very difficult, I know, to get that message out. As aggressive as it is, how hopeful are you that once you get it out of the House that we can get it through the Senate?
Yeah, so I'm on enterprise zones, that's law now. Social impact bonds, law. So we've been agitating outside groups, go and start promoting this thing, you know what I mean? Go talk to the governor in the state and start setting up capital funds and start getting this stuff going. I'm trying to talk to the finance community, you know, go invest, get moving, partner with community groups. So many people don't even know we did this. That's why we've done a lot lately. And that's why I think that is just telling the story and getting things moving. I feel we actually had dinner to talk about this stuff last night over in the White House. I feel on the infrastructure bills, we've got a good path forward. Those are bipartisan bills, and I think the Senate, you know, the trick in the Senate is getting over 60. The House is usually not the problem. We've passed 500 bills out of the House, and there's, 400 sitting in the Senate. So that's been a challenge. On the infrastructure bills, I think we got a real good shot. I think on prison reform, we've got a real good shot. Again, I'm not worried about the House. It's getting through the hump in the Senate. But I think that's a bipartisan bill as well. So when I say bipartisan, that means they're not going to have to burn a week of Senate time just passing one bill. And we can pass 7 bills in a week. So more than that if we really want to. So the more you can not have these filibusters and cloture and this and that, the more we can get done. I think the infrastructure stuff, and I think the prison reform, and I think agriculture, which is food stamp, SNAP reform is an important component of workforce development, and it is an important tool to get people into apprenticeship programs, to get people into work, and that gets people onto lives of self-sufficiency and opportunity. And I think that is something that also it's high time, especially in a good economy in a tight labor market like we have right now.
We're going to go to Dr. Langston.
Mr. Speaker, pleasure to have you here this morning. I'd like to make a request that prior to your leaving, you could make a commitment to have statutory authority for the Minority Business Development Agency.
Oh, I didn't even get a piece of paper.
I am a past national director, and one of the things that I was unable to do right before leaving that agency was to...
It's not reauthorized, you're saying? Its authorization expired?
It's under executive order.
Okay.
And it has,
there's a lot of bills, a lot of laws like that, yeah.
The Minority Business Development Agency started under President Nixon. It was amended under President Reagan, and it was made a national enterprise organization under President Bush. We fund, with our minority enterprise programs, we funded the Urban League, we funded the National Minority Development Council, we funded various technology centers, and we have funded HBCUs. I believe it is critical that this agency not have to be scared every appropriation process that it's going to be eliminated. Office of Management and Budget has made it one of its goals to eliminate that, as well as Economic Development Administration and also the Manufacturing Extension Program at Commerce. These programs help fund, I think, would augment enterprise legislation that you have just talked about. So I would encourage you, before you leave Congress, and thank you for your service, if you could have statutory authority for the Minority Business Development Agency.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Mr. Lewis Green
next. Thank you again for your remarks, Mr. Speaker. I am President of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. We represent, through our network of 23 regional centers and partners, 1.4 million minority businesses, Hispanic, African American, Asian American. Our members last year paid over $54 billion in taxes, so many of them wanted me to share thank you for the Tax Cuts Act. No one minds paying taxes. No one wants to pay too much taxes, right? And, you know, when you're a successful business, you know, so they don't mind paying. They don't want to pay too much, so they wanted me to send you their thanks. I was the economic policy advisor under Governor Engler, and some things that John had has kind of inspired me on my role of working with minority entrepreneurs. And what we've been able to do in the private sector, we're a private sector organization. In fact, every corporation in the room, Eli Lilly, Mr. Mascrib, Comcast, Uber, are all part of our organization, is to help these minority entrepreneurs create jobs. It's over 3 million jobs with our organizations. But what we're missing is that the federal government isn't as good as the private sector. And we really want to encourage and look for you in leadership as part of a legacy in the vein of what Jack Kemp did to help these minority businesses to have a similar opportunity in terms of access to capital. Only 2.9% of the capital that comes out of the SBA goes to minority business. In terms of opportunities of level playing field for federal contracts, federal government is the largest procurement organization in the world. Our folks who do very well in corporate America have very limited, no access to there. I think it's such a difference we can make in inspiring these entrepreneurs to have that level playing field. No one wants set-asides or anything like that. We want the opportunity to compete fairly, and we don't have that now. We would really love to craft some things as part of your legacy to help. This is the best way to create jobs is through entrepreneurship. It's through small businesses. No offense to my great corporate members in the room, but it's small businesses.
Yeah.
You know, and our folks on average employ 17. Our average business employs 17. Our largest business is an $8 billion concern, smaller. So just wanted to kind of see if we could work with your team on crafting some things as part of that legacy to foster minority entrepreneurship, which is going to continue to help drive this economy.
Okay. I won't respond to everyone because I don't want to miss the chance for you guys to talk. So,
I think, Don, you wanted a question?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted, first of all, thanks for your comments and addressing some of my concerns. What I wanted to mention was a few things. When we talk about unemployment, I think one statistic that gets somewhat overlooked is since we started tracking African-American unemployment in the 1960s, the Urban League does it every year in our State of Black America report. It doesn't matter what the white unemployment rate is. Ours is always 2.5 to 3 times higher than. So I'm very encouraged to hear that you've got some targeted ideas on how we can change that. You mentioned reform, and the word reform does not concern me. I think all Americans want to see things made better and tighter. What concerns me is when I hear reforms about safety net programs, and I know that the Urban League wasn't at the table during these discussions. And not that we're the only organization that understands, but you talked about those agencies, those organizations that deal with poverty every day. The Urban League has been dealing with poverty since 1910.
they're just launching the effort. The Agriculture Committee is jurisdiction here. They're just starting it on Thursday. So please go.
We want to be part of that, and we found it very difficult over the last couple of years, I think, of making sure that we're able to see bipartisan members. And so we're hoping, before you leave, that you lead by example, but we want to be at those discussions with our Republican brothers and sisters or our Democratic brothers and sisters to say, hey, we've got some ideas too.
Okay.
So we're going to go to Mr. Woodson, then April, then Aaron, and then Carl.
I got
2 minutes. Okay, so we're going to go.
I'm sorry.
So we're going to go to Woodson and then Aaron. So
I just
have
have
two questions.
A quick statement. That's all, not a question. But I hope that I was asked by several reporters, you know, what is your role in the Republican Party? And I hope it will be to lead them to a greater understanding about where the solutions to poverty exist. Gingrich said that the Republican Party will never be a popular party as long as it's perceived to be against the interests of poor minority people. Right. And you have demonstrated in your walk that outreach works.
I look forward to having more time to do that.
Good.
Last two questions, Aaron and then April.
Mr. Speaker, thanks for being with us today. I know that you're well aware that surveys that have been done show disparities in who's working for members of Congress, who's working in Congress, and who the American people are. Just yesterday, we saw some new research that found that insofar as the data is available, there seems to be a wage gap in Congress between white employees and employees of color as well. And that's not just indicative, I think, of a potential problem of legitimacy when the government doesn't look like the people that it represents, but also it's an indicator that Congress is missing out on some of the best talent that's out there. We also know that every study that's been done shows that inclusion is a boon to the private sector, that companies that pay some attention to this and do good work on it improve their bottom lines that inclusion fosters creativity and innovation. So Congress is the one major employer and institution in our country that doesn't even disclose how it's doing. I know you also appreciate the importance of evidence and doing policy based on actual facts instead of, kind of what we think we know. So private employers in the country disclose their employment data by race and ethnicity. Federal agencies do the same, are subject to.
Yeah, it's all disclosed here in Congress. It's all online. You can go see it.
Race and ethnicity data of employees.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I also wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask about the data.
My chief of staff, the highest ranking staffer in all of U.S. Congress, has told me this.
Going to follow up on that. In the Senate.
Just so you know. Yeah.
In the Senate, amongst Republicans, there's an informal effort to collect the resumes, to share information about potential candidates of color who may not have the network.
Aaron, you're getting a little politician in you. We need to get on to April for the last question, but thank you.
Would you help us to do something similar on the House side amongst Republicans?
Yeah, we'll show you how to get online and see the stuff you're asking for.
Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mr. Saylor, and thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Urban League. I want to reiterate and ask a question along the lines of what President James had to say. You've done a lot. There's a lot that you listed that's on the table that we did not know about. But as you are leaving, you're going home to your teens. I have teens too. I have a 15-year-old starting to drive.
Yeah, I know. I got the same problem.
Yeah, I know. And you want to be next to them when they're at the wheel. So as you are leaving, what do you think is still on the table? What are you thinking that you weren't able to tackle when it came to the Black community and economics? And economics touches almost everything in the Black community. The Black community still has the highest numbers of negatives in almost every category. What is still on the table?
I still think we need to overhaul our social safety net. And I think I'm a big believer in getting power back to local units of government, and I want to break up the monopoly. I want to break up what people call the welfare monopoly so that different groups can be service providers. Let Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, Salvation Army, American Works, whoever, be the contractor and the provider of social services in a county so that people have choices instead of just the county welfare agency, have choices so we have comprehensive case management to focus on an individual specific person's issues and problems. The problem with the federal approach on poverty is it treats everybody as if they're the same. It's a one-size-fits-all system, and we do not customize based on a person's particular needs and problems and desires and issues. And by empowering local poverty-fighting groups using metrics and outcome-based measurements to focus on the outcomes of getting a person from where they are to where they need to be, I really think that should be the 21st century approach to fighting poverty. We spend $800 billion a year fighting poverty through 72 programs of the federal government. I'm rounding the numbers here. And we're not doing it based on, it's not outcome-based, it's not results-based, and it's not customized to a person's particular problems. That's what I think we need to do. But that's a huge, it's a big debate. It's a debate I want to continue participating in. This kind of job, I'm worried about Syria right now and all this other stuff. So you spend a lot of time on a lot of different issues. I look forward to being able to focus a little bit more on some of the things I'm passionate about. I apologize, but I'm a weird Midwest punctuality guy. Do you want to do a quick picture? And
yep,
yeah,
we can
so I just
roll in.
I'm weird about that. Bob knows my ways.
So whenever you're ready.